All right, thank you, thank you. Hello, everybody. It's gonna take a second till we have a couple viewers on, but I'm super excited today to have a special guest on. This is Dylan Herschel. Is that how I pronounce your last name, or do I have to put more of
Uh,
a space in there?
yeah, I usually say Hirsch-Shell with like it's a very
Yeah,
tiny pause, I guess.
Herschel.
My,
Yeah,
my I don't think my mom considered the difficulty of pronunciation when she decided to do this.
just
But
should have
yeah.
just squeezed them all together into one name, just
Yeah,
Herschel. And
people sometimes
yeah,
just do that anyway. They'll just say Herschel and they'll just spell it that way too. But
yeah.
it's not a big deal either way. Yeah, it really made my childhood a lot more difficult than it needed to be, though. I should say. Standardized test taking was just terrible.
Yeah. So Dylan, first and foremost, today we're going to talk about land value tax. That is the primary focus of today. And I'm super excited because I've had like one serious conversation about it. I don't feel like I really internalized it though. So I'm really excited for you to kind of share, have a better conversation about what it's about and stuff. And you'll be able to freely share your screen if you'd like, if there are good visuals that you have. If not, no big deal.
Okay.
Um, but I met Dylan through voting method reform. You're very active in this space. I know you're big on approval voting, on star voting, and we've just kind of through the Twitter sphere and our interactions with Center for Election Science and Equal Vote Coalition. And I was talking to Andrea Denault, who I really need to bring on this stream sometime. Um, uh,
Yeah, she would be a great guest for you.
yeah, there's all sorts of stuff she could talk about. Campaign organizers she could talk about, like indigenous stuff. I mean, of course, voting method reform, but I bring on people for that all the time. Um, I'd mentioned it to her because basically what happened was, I ran for Congress for a year before suspending my campaign, and I had a proposal for an unconditional basic income based off of Andrew Yang's freedom dividend. And the primary funding mechanism for that is a value added tax. But then I came across Max, who runs the Center for UBI, and they're very focused on the number side of like funding basic incomes. And he looked over my proposal and he said, look, that Andrew Yang's calculations for VAT were like really overblown, and you're not going to be able to fund what you have with if you're basing it off of his. And so I've been thinking about additional funding mechanisms. So one thing I don't have in there is a carbon tax. I do cut subsidies to fossil fuel actually eliminate subsidies to fossil fuel companies, but I'm totally down to add a carbon tax. I've been looking at like step up in basis, going after that. But a land value tax, I think, is another really could potentially be another really powerful tool. It's something that a lot of people have been talking about, and it's something that I feel like I don't really fully understand. And so I would love to have a better idea about it and think about how I might be able to work that into a proposal, but also just be able to generally talk about a land value tax. And so Andrea said, "Hey, Dylan knows about land value tax. Like this is a huge thing he loves." And so it's like I'm super excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, and I should note to begin with that I am not an expert on land value taxation. I'm an enthusiast for
Mm-hmm.
sure, and I've read a deal quite a bit about it, but I'm not an economist, so I feel like you know if you really want to get the nitty gritty, you need to talk to an economist. But I should say that like there are many very well known, well respected economists who have looked at it and have said glowing things about it. So and these are people who've gotten Nobel prizes, and they're from across the political spectrum, and they say great things about land value taxation. So I kind of take some comfort in that. So yeah, but sure, I'm happy to share with you whatever knowledge I have gained, and I'll try to do my best to point people to any additional resources that they can look at for further study on their own. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Did you want to start with kind of your understanding of land value taxation as it stands right now?
Uh, I mean, yeah. So like I said, it sounded like there are a variety of ways to implement it. So I think one example I heard was you sort of rent land from the government in a way. That might have been a different system, but like you take out a contract for however many decades or whatever, and then at the end, based on how much resource extraction you've done, like you effectively have to restore that. You have to basically make the land whole again before you leave. Um, I don't know that that was specifically land value tax. It might have been a different system, but a land value tax, to me, just on the surface, it sounds very simply like if you own land, you have to pay tax for it, or maybe it's more tightly tied to resource extraction. I've heard a variety of different things, and I hear where you're coming from about enthusiast, not expert, and I think that that's something that I think a lot of us feel that way about a lot of topics. It's like I try not to call myself an expert on voting method reform. I didn't do what Jameson Quinn did. I didn't go to Harvard to get a PhD
Right,
in statistics.
right.
Um, but I mean, even just to get like a basic understanding of like, I mean, like I want to kind of start from the beginning because anybody
Sure.
could be watching this and want to
Yeah,
just hear
yeah.
about it. So,
Okay, great. Yeah. So I mean, I guess like a lot of people maybe would be asking, first of all, like what is land value taxation, and like what, like don't we already do that? We have property taxes, right?
hmm
And so like that's probably a good place to start, is to say like how is a land value tax different from property taxes? And the key difference there is, um, property taxes take into account the what's called like the improvements on the land. So if I own a plot of land in the middle of a city in some downtown area and I build a skyscraper, um, I get taxed on the value of that building that I built, and it's going to add a huge amount to the property tax, because when that gets assessed, the value is astronomical compared to just an empty plot of land in that same space. Um, so land value taxation would ignore the uh, the improvements on that land, right? That's not to say that improvements won't impact land value. This is one of the criticisms that people start to level against land value taxes, is like, well, how do you actually parse out what the land itself is worth and what the improvements are worth? And it's true. I think from what I've determined from looking into it, like I don't know that it really is possible. I think that that's true to say you can't completely separate the two, but um, it it's something that you can at least explicitly avoid dinging someone just for, like, say adding a new um, bedroom on their house or something. Like that in and of itself shouldn't necessarily increase the tax that you would pay for occupying that plot of land that you were on, that in terms of like the way that the rest of society views that plot of land, it's still worth the same amount of money. um so like that's kind of like the key difference between property tax and land value tax, is like you're trying to tax what is the inherent value of taking up that space. You kind of got into also sort of like the resources that are in that land, and that kind of gets at like what is the reason we would want to tax land, and what is it that makes land valuable. And yeah, like land, a lot of economists like land value taxation because it has no dead weight loss. And dead weight loss is this term that economists use to talk about like whenever you're talking about any tax, like if there's um, a negative impact on society, then that's a dead weight loss. So you're like, say you're taxing income, then you're discouraging people from working harder in theoretically, and so like that extra labor and effort that they would have put in could have benefited society by growing the economic pie by some amount. So that's dead weight loss that you're introducing by having that tax. With land, there's like a fixed amount of land. It, it more or less, you could get into some of the details and weeds of like, cutting down rainforest to make more usable land for a city that's on the outskirts or something like that. But I mean, in in general terms, there's a fixed amount of land, and so um, that land, it has to be used by somebody. And if you if you don't try to tax that, then you're basically allowing people to kind of monopolize that land and take advantage of that privileged position and sort of like the historical accidental situation. Either they were born into a family that already had that land, or they're in a situation where they got lucky and they're able to use that land, and then um, no one else has that opportunity anymore unless they're willing to pay the price that this person is setting. And um, you know they, by virtue of occupying that land, they gain so much benefit from what they can take from the land, that they can essentially like hold other people hostage and prevent those people from ever gaining the means to have enough money to buy the land off of them. So it's uh, a lot of what I know of this, and why I got excited by this actually comes from my introduction to Henry George. I don't know if you've have you heard of Henry George before? And he wrote a book called Progress and Poverty. Um,
Maybe.
so basically, Henry George was he was from like uh, Pennsylvania originally, but he like moved out to the West Coast, and he lived in San Francisco for a while. He was working like as a printer, and he noticed like, San Francisco was turning into this city that was full of inequality. You had these people who were extremely rich on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you had people that were like paupers living in the streets. And he was asking himself, what the heck is going on? Why do we have so much prosperity on the one hand and poverty on the other hand? And so he took it upon himself to dive into the economics of it, and read a bunch. Started with Adam Smith and read all these economic books, and in the end, he basically came up with the conclusion that the reason there was all this poverty is because people are able to own land and monopolize it and extract value. Maybe you've heard the term like rent seeking or rent seekers. Like that's kind of a term that a lot of people kind of like on the right wing of the political spectrum, or like libertarianism, will throw that around a lot, as sort of a criticism of people who are like leeches on the economy and are not actually like contributing anything. They're just able to like unfairly extract value from other people in the economy, without contributing anything to themselves. And so this is kind of an example of like rent seeking, where people are able to squat on this land and then hold it hostage, essentially. Um, And the book is he wrote that in like 1879, I think, and it became uh, basically it was like an international sensation. He sold like millions of books. It became like more popular than the Bible, and he became like world famous, and it inspired all of these people all over the world to start these movements. And one of the things he advocated in the book was like you should uh, you should actually take rent, like whatever people charge for rent on the land, that's the true value of that land, because that's what the economy says they can get from it. And so we should be taxing that rent, and that because it's this sort of perfect tax, we should actually eliminate all other taxes, and we should have that as our single tax. And we should and then that would then fund all of our government. And so you had all these people all over the world that they call themselves like single taxers or Georgists. And I mean, like every prominent economist in like from 1880 to probably 1950, you'll see, like if you go back and you look at their writings, like they would have been writing about Henry George, and sort of like anything they thought about was it had to take into account whatever Henry George had written in Progress and Poverty. Now, like today, most people have never even heard of Henry George or heard of Progress and Poverty. But I mean, it's really kind of sad, because everything he wrote about in 1879 San Francisco is true today. And you have the disgusting wealth inequality again today, and land value taxation is still this theoretical idea that really should work, but we're just ignoring it as a solution. And much like with UBI, you can point to all these Nobel Prize winning economists from the last 100 years who have looked into it, and they said, yeah, UBI is great. I'm all for it. Uh, you know, you Milton Friedman, like he has his negative income tax proposal, which was a form of UBI. He also has, there's quotes out there of him saying how great land value tax is, and how it's like if taxes suck, but if you're going to have to do them, this is the way to do it. Um, so um, yeah, so the single taxers were like a really formidable movement, and you still have some kind of like last vestiges of all of that activity around. Actually, kind of quite interestingly, um, there were a couple of places in the U.S. that did implement land value taxes, and one of them is a city in Delaware where Joe Biden actually was born and grew up. So he's from the president of the United States currently grew up in a town that was founded on the premise that land value taxes are the way to go. It's the perfect tax. Let's fund our government with that. But you never hear him talk about land value taxes.
Yeah, there's a lot the political elites don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So yeah, really interesting this idea of the perfect tax. But I do think again that begs the question of like resource extraction, right? So you talked about calculating it based on like what people would pay rent for, but people do all sorts of different things with land. They don't just do housing with it, especially now that housing is becoming more of a piece of currency in this country than it is an actual thing to house people. Is what it feels like lately. But so the question is like, okay, how do we figure that into it? And then also separate question that I think is kind of shorter. Would a vacant land tax then be kind of a compromise split middle ground between a land value tax and a property tax?
Yeah, I guess as far as like the speculation goes, yeah, I mean that's something that like Henry George was talking all about in, when in Progress and Poverty. Like he saw that happening all over the place in, as new territories were opening up all over the Western United States, which of course had just been stolen from the people who had been living there before. Suddenly they're like, okay, it's free land, here you go. um, so that was happening. It was rampant, and it still happens today. Like I'm sure you're in Austin, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people rushed into Austin trying to buy up land, thinking, oh, this is going to go up in value. I'm going to hold on to it and wait and see if I can make a killing here. Chinese have done it in downtown LA. I know there's a lot of
Doing it in
vacant
Austin too.
buildings that were bought, and still empty, after many years, because they're just holding on to it, hoping they can make a lot more money later. So yeah, I guess the the theory says that if you do a pure land value tax, um, it just works itself out, where the incentive structure is such that speculation doesn't work. Um,
Okay,
but
I see what you're saying now.
but I think you're right that like a vacant land or vacant plot tax, or vacant building tax, like those kinds of things are going a long way towards setting up the incentive structure that we're looking for. But they're not. They are a compromise. I don't think they provide uh, quite the benefit that you would see from a land value tax. Um, and uh, if you're trying to do something like fund a UBI with land value taxes, then of course you're severely limiting your revenue stream in that case. Um, so yeah, I mean it's certainly something that is in the absence of having like a full blown land value tax. I definitely agree. Like it's something we should have. Like tax. I look around my neighborhood here in San Francisco, and I see at least 3 or 4 empty plots of land. I've lived here for, I know they've been empty for at least 10 years, probably a lot longer than that even. Um, and many buildings that are empty as well. Um, so it's an idea that has been getting more popular. I think Oakland, I think, passed a law couple years ago to tax vacant buildings, vacant homes. But yeah, and as far as like the resources, and what you can extract, that's an interesting concept, because that can change over time, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't actually know the value of the land and the resources in it is something that is not fixed. It changes over time. There's multiple factors to look at. One is like, what do we know is in the land, in terms of minerals, oil, whatever's underground that's like a useful element. Then there's like the quality of the soil itself. Has it been fallow for a while, or what? Can it sustain growing, you know, really valuable crops? Is it close to a water source? Is it close to other desirable places? So like all of those factors kind of play into what the final value of the land is. And that, going back to like why Henry George was a big fan of saying, well, we should tax rent, is it sort of the rent kind of incorporates all of that, and it's fluid, and it's sort of, you don't have to centrally decide somewhere what the value is. It's decided by the person who's charging that rent. Um,
So what I'm trying to understand then is that you're saying that you're only getting this tax from places that have that charge rent.
so I think that that's another criticism that people have, is like, well, how the heck do you actually implement this, right? How do you, if you're charging, if you're taxing rent and someone is not renting out their land, what do you do? And I've thought about this, and I think, one possible way you could solve that is you could do just like a mathematical uh, average. Geographically, there's rent being charged here, there's rent being charged here, there's rent being charged here. We could just like say, okay, the average of the distance between those two gives you this value here or something. I mean, that's not perfect though, because obviously like resources are not uniformly distributed, so you could be under or overcharging, but it is at least one possible way to do it in a semi like it's a unbiased way. But we do already have assessments that are done on land values by cities all over the place, right? I mean, when you get your property tax bill, you do see a portion that they say this is what your land is worth, and that's what we're charging you tax on. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like an open pit mine that's like way off. There's no it's like there's like city, then there's a bunch of rural, then there's the mine, and then there's nothing until you get to the next state. Like
right,
how do you, I mean, like, there's so much value in that land,
right,
and it's like, how, like, they're not renting it out. This company is, bought the land, they own it, and they're just
yeah, yeah,
maybe they're wrecking the environment with it too, right? Maybe they're putting off all sorts of pollutants into a nearby river. So like,
well, that I mean, we should be charging, we should be taxing that, right? We should be taxing all forms of pollution, all carbon emissions, anything that has like a negative externality that isn't like accurately priced into the products that they're selling.
yeah,
Right? Like, that's the way to deal with the pollution question. But then as far as like their, like, what value are they getting from that land? Yeah, I mean, Andrew, or sorry, what's his name? Not Andrew. There's a book called Radical Markets, by what is his name? Glenn Weil, Eric Posner and Glenn Weil. And radical markets, they propose a system where basically you could have like a database where like everyone who has any land says, here's the price that I'm willing to sell this for today. And it has to be like a contract, basically. Like, you're saying, I'm signing a contract that says if anyone has the money, they can buy this from me today. That's the value of my land, and that's what I'm going to pay taxes on. So that could be another way of dealing with it, that kind of takes care of the edge case that you're talking about. Because like, that people are not going to overinflate or under value the land. Like, they want to make sure if someone actually did buy it, that they'd get what they need, what they think they deserve for it. Um,
I mean, would
so
they be forced to sell though? I mean, like if you can, right? Like, let's say I own this mine, this open pit mine. It's away from everybody, and like, I say it's worth $1, and then somebody comes along, well, then I'll buy it from you for $1. Like, and can I just, if I can just say no, then I can just keep saying it's worth $1 and only pay, tax on $1 worth of land.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's where, I mean, that's what their proposal is, that they would be compelled to sell it, basically.
So, but then
um,
if you're compelled to sell it, then you run into this problem of like, well, when you have somebody or some company with a huge concentration of wealth comes along, now that everybody's just compelled to sell their land, like how do you protect from them just buying up egregious amounts of land?
yeah,
Like, and then in theory, what you're saying is that economically it kind of fixes itself, but I think that there is damage to be done when you can just go to somebody like who owns their own little piece of property and just say, I'm buying this from you, you have to move out now. Like,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it definitely, in the context of wealth inequality, that gets to be problematic for sure. And I think this is somewhat unrelated, but I think this is why we do need to tie it to some kind of a universal basic income that gets
mm-hmm.
funded with the land value tax, because there is sort of this like push and pull effect, I think, on the way that people view the land and owning land, and whether if they're going to get taxed on it, like that, they need to feel like they're going to get something back from it and somehow. um and I think if you look at the context of a city, there it's much easier to see, I think, that like if you tax land and you have a UBI in place, then you can get to this equilibrium point where like the size of the city doesn't grow too big, because the more people who move in, the more expensive land's going to get, and then they're going to raise the tax. And so like there's sort of, it forms like a sweet spot um, between growth and um, like density of the city. But um, yeah, I know, like there's other proposals out there where like you basically say that the government buys all the land uh, at time zero, and then they hand out like stewardship licenses or something, where they say, okay, like you have the privilege of using this land, and we're going to charge you this amount for it. Um, but it gets, it, I think this, I mean, this is sort of highlighting one of the problems of the land value tax, is like, in theory, it sounds great, but then when you get into like the practical nuts and bolts of how do you actually implement it, no matter which proposal you come up with, you can probably find some situation where that doesn't work. And so we might need some kind of a um, hybrid approach in the end, where in high density areas you can do some kind of like, okay, like everyone's renting, or they're close enough to someone who's renting, that you can sort of tell just based on that what this land's actually worth. And then really far away from high density cities, like the land, you just buy it from, the government buys it, and the government just has licenses, and they can periodically update what they say the value is if new resources are identified that really increase the value of that land a great deal, or as resources are depleted, you decrease the value of the land. um,
I will say I like this idea of a local land value tax, of like individual cities deciding to implement it and use that money to fund a basic income, an unconditional basic income locally. I think that actually makes a lot of sense. I think that kind of helps to deal, like you can, I feel like that is much more workable than trying to do like a national land value tax for a country like the United States, which is, of course, just geographically enormous and diverse. Um, so I think that kind of makes sense. Yeah, that would actually be, I think, a really cool way because Andrew Yang was proposing a vacancy tax to help pay for a basic income program in New York City when he was running for mayor. Um, and so I think again, yeah, kind of along the same lines that a local land value tax may be a really good way to fund a basic income just within a city. I think that
Hmm.
actually does make a lot of sense because you're right about there's enough renting happening in the city that you can leverage that to figure out everything else. Um, yeah, that's really intriguing. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm trying to think, like, what else I would. I mean, I will say that the basic income proposal that I was making had a variety of pay fors. And it's about kind of mixing and matching. The goal was to overfund my proposal just to give room for negotiations, and so just trying to find all a variety of different sources because I was
Yeah.
looking at like eliminating the what is it the cap on taxable income for Social Security. I was looking at like
Mm.
capital gains or eliminating the favorable treatment for capital gains and carried interest. I was looking at like cutting military contractors. I was looking at, yeah, I was looking at just a smorgasbord of things.
Yeah.
As well as like how to streamline conditional welfare programs within it, in the same kind of by making it opt in, so you can either keep what you have or you can switch to basic income. Um, so yeah, that's really intriguing. Is there anything else you want to say about the land value tax that maybe we missed or didn't go over?
I mean, I guess I didn't really touch on the sort of moral argument for it.
Yeah.
It was kind of implied maybe, but you know, again, going back to Henry George, this was something that he really harped on a lot in Progress and Poverty, was like, um, in terms of like justice, and morality. If you think about, like, say the example he gave, which I thought was great, was like, say you're on a train and you go to the banquet car, to get your food. Like, the first person who got there, say they go into the banquet car and then they turn around and they put a rope across the door, and then they say, sorry, I got here first, now you're going to have to like pay me X amount to get in and eat. Like, that's essentially what's happened with the people who occupy land today. Like, you're born into this world, you have nothing.
It's like
you
Monopoly, the game.
you Yeah, exactly. And that, in fact, Monopoly was based on Georgism, like the woman who invented the game
Yeah, it was originally it was
initially. Yeah.
the original version was supposed to be criticism, and it kind of evolved into this other thing.
Yeah, yeah. It was supposed to show, like, here's what happens when, if you don't have everyone like getting equal share of the land, and like benefiting from it equally, then you end up with this unfairness, right? Um, so I think, from a moral standpoint, it can speak to a lot of people. If you're thinking about, like, politically, how do you sell this? Um, some people aren't going to be swayed by an economic argument, like, dead. Oh, it minimizes dead weight loss. Okay, great. What the hell does that mean? And why should I care? But if you talk about it in terms of, well, like, the land is your birthright as a human being, as it is everyone else's. Then you can start maybe inspiring some people to get into it from that standpoint of fairness and equality. And that ties into some of the ideas of, like, other cultures, indigenous cultures. So I think there's some interesting and fruitful cross pollination there that could be explored and expanded upon for someone who's trying to build this into a political platform. Um, I guess one other thing I would say is, again, like, sort of sticking on like political practicalities. How do you try to argue for this? You could theoretically uh, say, okay, we're gonna actually replace the property tax with the land value tax. And I mean, I don't even, if I want to do this as a city, I don't even have to necessarily um, lobby the state to change their state property tax laws. I could maybe say, and I haven't vetted this with lawyers, so I don't know like how legal this is, but like you could maybe say, all right, well, we're gonna we're gonna pay for everyone's property taxes with the revenue we get from the land value tax. So you're not gonna pay double, right? Pretend like your property tax is just zero. Then we're gonna charge you this land value tax instead, and don't worry about it, we'll take care of the accounting for you. And so like some people on a large plot of land with a small house, you might end up paying more, but for other people on a tiny plot with like a huge house, they might pay less, and so that might be more politically palatable um, than just trying to start getting people excited about yet another tax when they already feel like they have so many taxes, and they don't want to keep paying more and more taxes, and you can sort of mix and match too, like do other trades, like okay, I'm interested in taxing I want to do a land value tax, and we can increase it so much that we'll pay for all these programs, and therefore we don't need our income tax level to be as high as it is, so we can decrease the income tax accordingly. And you know that way you're you're able to uh, negotiate a bit better. I think so. I think it's important, as you're building up your total, and you were kind of talking about that earlier about like things you're willing to cut, maybe. Um, and I
Yeah.
think that's a great strategy, and I think you should push really hard on it, and um, Max on the Center for UBI, I think they have a paper on how a
Mm-hmm.
flat
I
income
read
tax
that actually.
could
Clishan
cover UBI.
sent
Yeah,
it to me.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really
Perfect. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's a great article, and really thought provoking. And I think if you could combine land value tax, a flat income tax, and all these Pigovian taxes, carbon tax, pollution taxes, and then try to minimize every other tax as much as possible, and like genuinely convince people that like the overall tax that they're going to pay is the same or less than today, despite how scary it sounds, right? That's the key. You have to really convince people, like, look, if you make under, say it's $80,000 a year or whatever, you're gonna pay less, guaranteed, because I've done the math and here it is.
Yeah, kind of a comprehensive package. Scott Santens did that a little bit by combining unconditional basic income with um, universal health care and like just eliminating waste in the
Right.
government. About like there's enough waste at the level of the federal government to just pay for a basic income pretty much, and the basic income will also replace a lot of inefficiencies. And so, yeah, no, you're totally right. Like thinking about how to put all of this together. And
And it has like positive impact on the economy, right? Like
yeah,
if you're injecting money, I think there would be, if you talk about it like a land value tax funding a UBI, I think there would be a dual positive impact on the economy there.
hmm
You can sort of get credit for reducing the deadweight loss by shifting the taxes into land value tax, and additionally by distributing that money in a UBI, you're stimulating the economy from the bottom up.
hmm
And so you should end up with a lot more economic growth. Um, so yeah,
yeah. The income tax generally is just seems like a fairly broken concept just kind of on the surface a little bit. Like things like consumption taxes and resource taxes, pollution taxes, land taxes seem just like a more efficient, solid way rather than trying to go after like income and wealth, particularly because of not just the ability of individuals to skate around things. And you start looking at like the complications and loopholes and stuff, but also just like you said, you take money away from people, then they have less money to spend, they consume less, and that hurts the economy, right? And so like and look, I'm not a big economy is the end all be all, but you need people doing things and moving, and people need to make things at least to some degree. If at the bare minimum, food and places to live and hospitals and schools and stuff. Um, and so you want to stimulate at least that. But I actually kind of want to circle back because you talked about the moral side of it, and the whole conversation I was thinking about everything I've been learning from indigenous folks and land stewardship, and how we all belong to the land. We don't own land, we steward the land. And kind of how this is in a kind of a similar spirit. It's a more kind of like Western economics version of that. But I think in spirit, it's still kind of the thing of like, if you're going to take up a lot of land, you need to contribute to, like, you need it, that ownership, or that kind of like selfishness of it, that needs to contribute to the community in a powerful way. And that's why I think, combined with the basic income program, it makes a lot of sense. Basic income, as you said, a lot of economists very positive on it. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Yeah, this is really really cool. I'm really glad you came on and talked to me about this. And did you have a response to anything I just said, actually?
Um, yeah, I guess. I mean, I think you're right. Like the Western point of view on it is much more. I guess it's two aspects. It's like economics, and thinking about like efficiencies, but then there's also sort of an emphasis on individual liberties and rights, human rights, which uh, I think I think are universal, but kind of came from a more Western way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I guess the indigenous peoples point of view goes a bit deeper and kind of touches on even like Eastern ideas, I think, from say like Buddhism, about how, we are one with the universe. And I mean, in a very real way, we not only are we all sort of entitled to the land, and we are stewards of the land, but we actually are the land. We are all stardust, as Carl Sagan said. And the same elements that our planet is made up of is what we are made up of. Like, we can't have any atoms in our bodies that didn't come from the earth already, and they will all go back to the earth again when we die.
Mm-hmm.
So in a very real sense, I mean, this is scientific. It's not woo woo BS, spirituality. This is like the science says this is true too. um, and it's taken me. I'm someone who's always come from like a very scientific kind of like atheistic point of view, and it's taken me many years to come to realize that that this is the way things are, and that there were deeper truths in all of the religions and the sort of uh, uh, kind of esoteric philosophies I was exposed to and kind of shrugged off early on. I think there's a lot of wisdom there that we should pay attention to, and help that to guide our values system, which then in turn should guide our public policy. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on once again. Super. I'm just glad to know more about this and have a better. I feel like I understand land value tax, um, and like I actually understand it now. Like I think I have a real appreciation for what it is. Um, and I just look forward to seeing you around and talking about voting method reform. I'm sure we'll get
yeah,
back into it. I don't know if you know,
cool.
I'm a board director for the Equal Vote Coalition now.
I did know that. Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. That's
Yes,
fantastic.
super excited. Lots of cool things coming up. The main limit right now is just we just need to get a little bit more funding, and we're gonna be
Hmm.
off and running. Ruben was just elected president of the Star Voting Action Board, and he's working hard in Redondo Beach, and it sounds
Nice.
in California. Looks like some stuff's gonna be happening there. Eugene, Oregon, of course. The shenanigans with the ballot signatures, but we're making progress on that. There's a group out in Massachusetts I'm super excited about. So yeah, that's what we're at. But yeah,
Yeah, there's a
it's
lot of exciting stuff going on with approval as well. I'm sure you probably heard about
yeah.
Seattle
Seattle just got their
coming down the
grant.
pipe, and I think we might see some good stuff in maybe like Utah. There's like a very active chapter out
Hmm.
there that I think they're pretty well organized.
Yeah,
Um,
Nate Allen's doing
Missouri,
great work. We actually just
yeah.
connected with him recently. He's pro star as well. He's like
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think that's something interesting that you'll find is in the electoral reform world, most people they're there because they're like open-minded and they're like solutions oriented, and they're like they really care about like how do we fix this mess, and they're not dogmatic about it. And so you might find someone who says like you know I like I like approval and I like star. I just think approval has like a better chance of like uh, winning in this particular locale, so I'm going to support that there. But if Star does well in Oregon, I'm all for that too. Think that would be great. Um, versus and that, but that's sort of I think there's like just this commonality between people who support Star and people who support approval. Many people support both. Uh, and don't really have like that big of a they don't necessarily have one horse in the race. And I shouldn't use that analogy as a vegan. I'm like horrified by what I just said. um, I'm very conscious. I've been like talking to some people about like naming conventions and sort of like evaluating how our speech impacts the way people feel and inclusivity. And so that I'm trying to get better about speaking with intention. Um, so anyway, sorry, that was a digression. But
Um, no, you're good. I always tell people, people will come up to me all the time and say, I think we should focus on approval for this reason, or I
yeah,
think we should focus on star for this. And I was like, once you start reading election codes, you're gonna realize that we need both. We can't do
yeah,
it with just one.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. Have you ever seen those memes, the iceberg meme, the whatever, where it's like this? You ever seen that before?
I can't tell what's on there.
Here, let
I
me
don't think
see.
I've seen it. Yeah, I don't think I've seen it.
Here, let me pull up let me so I can see what I'm doing. Oh yeah, I was way too far away from the camera. So this meme. Um, so I made this. Do you see kind of like the concept of like it's an iceberg and you start at the top and you're just kind of talking about like I feel like I should just share my screen with it, but my computer is kind of laggy. But the
Oh,
idea is like at the top of the iceberg, I have things like vote by mail, primary elections, like runoff elections, minority voting rights. But then as you get down, I start talking about things like the Smith set and like cognitive load and liquid democracy. And then I get into like risk limiting audits in like Greece from 1965 or 1865 to 1923, and then like Ramon Lall and like Thiel versus Monroe versus Fragment and harmonic proportional methods and all this crap. And so it's like, you just get deeper into the iceberg. But one of the
Yeah.
things I did with it is in the top left corner, it just alternates between star voting and approval voting over and over again, and just adds more question marks as you go along.
Oh,
Hang
nice.
on, I'm reversing the mirror, and so it's just like, are you star voting? Are you approval voting? Are you star
I
voting? Are
see
you
it now.
approval
Yeah, I
voting?
love it.
Yeah,
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm heavily convinced by the like Jameson's VSE simulations
Mm-hmm.
and like Warren Smith's Bayesian regret simulations and I feel like in the absence of real world data, that's our best way. And even with real world data, I mean, that's always going to be highly idiosyncratic for like that specific location, that specific set of candidates, that specific electorate. Uh, when you get into the simulations and you can really explore that full space of possibilities for the way elections can go down, and you start to see these same methods bubble up to the top again and again and show like how immune they are to pathologies that other methods fall prey to. Like I think that's what really convinces me. And so like if you're plotting the voter satisfaction of star versus approval, yeah, maybe star is a little better, right? And so like I'm not gonna go super hard against star and say like, well, they suck
Mm-hmm.
because I've already picked my team with approval. What I do get convinced by, on the other hand, by people who advocate for star, like Center for Election Science. I mean, they're like hardcore, like we're going to do approval voting because we can't give money to everything, and this is our best shot, so let's
Mm-hmm.
focus our money on that. And I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, that's if if you have limited resources and you have to pick something, then in their minds, approval has the better shot of actually being adopted and not being repealed. And that is another element of it, right? Despite the like whatever the theoretical performance of the method is, like in the end, it doesn't matter if you can't actually get a local legislature to adopt it or something, right? Or whatever it takes. Like so, but that question of will it get adopted is itself a fluid, dynamic thing. And if you have enough dedicated, passionate people working towards something, you can get all sorts of things done. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to sit there and like poo-poo that idea of like, oh, you want to do star? No, like it's never going to happen. No, of course I'm going to encourage people to try to make it happen if they have the energy and the time and the willingness to do it. Like that's great. I want to see it happen, and I want to see all the different types of methods that we have in real world elections, like, and we can compare like what did we think was going to happen theoretically and how did it actually pan out, and then we know, and then we can move forward with the best methods.
Yeah, and that's one of the approaches that I'm like now trying to take with like the simulations, is like, people who dismiss it as like, number one, every science field uses simulations now. But number
Oh yeah.
two is the thing is if your voting method can't even hold up to the simulations, how do you like it? There's no way it's going to hold up in real life. Like
Right. Yeah.
the simulation should be like the first bar you have to get over.
Totally.
Like, don't think of it as like, oh, your simulations showed my method was bad, therefore your simulation is bad. It's like, no, no, no. If every simulation is showing that your method is bad, then there's no way it can stand up to the real world. Like, it has to start there.
I think
Um,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
but the yeah but yeah no but like you said about like excitement, like my personal experience, this is purely anecdotal, but star voting gets people really excited. I think that is like, I think there's just a natural bias there because it is just like strictly more expressive. that the
Absolutely.
folks who are more political and more enthusiastic about politics and wanting to improve the system naturally are just more expressive about all of the issues and all of the candidates and their voters who spend more time voting, and so they tend to be drawn towards Star. And the other thing I like about Star, specifically in the U.S., approval is simpler until you have to explain why it's better than ranked choice voting. And if fair vote didn't exist, I think Star would be a little bit less appealing. But because ranked choice voting is just so prominent, I think that gives Star an edge. Because I can make the argument that approval voting is better, but it's hard to teach other volunteers to be able to do that. And I think with Star voting, it's a little bit easier, or to the layperson, it's a little bit more obvious on the
Yeah.
service. But yeah, no, so absolutely both methods, super pumped, and I can't wait to see what equal vote does here. I'd love to see Star voting and approval voting just spread, and then we go from there. Then we start talking about, I'm working on liquid democracy stuff. I want to build a platform for that, and
Yeah,
other
liquid
government
democracy
candidates.
is really exciting. You
Hmm.
should really talk to. Have you ever met David Ernst?
I've not met him. I've heard of him.
Heard of him? Okay, yeah.
Is he pretty accessible?
It depends. I know last, what was it, like maybe a month ago or so, he was on like a meditation retreat. So
Okay.
out of commission for a while. But generally speaking, he's pretty approachable and really loves to chat about this stuff. So he's put in a lot of time on putting together demos for using liquid democracy on like mobile applications,
Hmm.
and shows some really exciting possibilities there. Of course, there's the huge concern around security when you talk about using electronic devices to vote, but
And I think I came up with a pretty simple, like, I don't want to say solution. We have to roll this out slowly and try it out.
mhm, mhm,
But you only allow internet voting during early voting, and then you cut it
mm,
off on the Friday. And then if there's a problem, you can void votes and tell people to go to the polls on election day and vote
hmm,
in person. So that acts as
that's
kind
an
of the
interesting
ultimate
idea.
paper backup.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, interesting. I like that.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he had David Ernst has a prototype that works on. I mean, obviously, it's using cryptography
yeah,
to guarantee the security, right? And there are these new methods, relatively new, that did. I mean, just in the last like 20 years or so, you now have the ability to guarantee the accuracy and validity of the vote without having to know who voted for what candidates. Like it's based purely on these like hashes of the data, but you can like mathematically prove it's correct without knowing anything about what's inside of this like giant black box, which is the votes.
does that require that the person is able to check that their vote is correct themselves? Is that part of that
They can
process?
do, yeah, they can check
Yeah,
themselves for their own particular vote, and then like the election officer can check the overall result is correct.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, he thought about all of that, and he's built it all into that overall system. So I think you should talk to him, and yeah, I mean, when he describes what he's done, it's just phenomenal. Like I'm
yeah,
a believer now. Before
yeah.
that, I was like, I don't know. I don't think electronic voting is ever going to be secure enough. But
Yeah, I think the other piece of that is like recognizing that what we've seen, that mail-in voting has remained secure even in the information age. Like everybody has a camera, an internet-connected camera in their pocket, yet
yeah.
mail-in voting has remained secure. And we've learned that it's because vote selling and vote coercion is more expensive per vote than campaigning. And it's like, okay, cool. So this anonymity thing, this like perfect anonymity thing, doesn't necessarily need to remain. If you do want a perfectly anonymous vote, you can go to the polls. We can keep that around. We can keep the mail-in voting, and we just add this
Right.
as a layer on top. And
Right.
so, that's a lot to spell out for people. I have talked about it before, but yeah, I would love to bring on. What was his name again?
David Ernst. I can send you
David
his
Ernst.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He because it's secureinternetvoting.org is
Yep.
the now the
That's
site
the
that it
one.
is.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I've
And once you like, if you accept you can cross that hurdle of like going full digital, then I mean the sky's the limit, like in terms of what you can do with liquid democracy, right? Because you can start to you can have all these options like, okay,
mhm,
uh, I want to select how to delegate my vote just with one person. That's all I care about. Just that one person takes care of everything for me. Or you can say, okay, on this topic
topic.
in this
Yep.
category, I give this person my vote. In this other category, I give this person my vote.
And now you
Um,
have a continuous public feedback loop. You have this data
yep.
which can be used to like sway representatives in certain directions.
Yep,
Um,
exactly. Yep.
yeah.
And you can switch to, you can go from approval to star voting with like the flip of a switch. I mean, it's instantaneous. Like, okay, which one do you want to use? Every locality can pick whichever one they're going to do, and it's like free to go with one versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't you don't have to start getting into, oh well, how much is it going to cost to print this new ballot or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right?
Yeah. Well, we got sidetracked there for a minute, but I actually I have an equal vote email now. I just
All
got
right,
my equal vote signature, so it's all official. So I
very
will
cool.
I think maybe if I reach out, he'll respond because I actually look real now.
Yeah.
But and I've got the nice headshots too. But
Very
well,
cool.
thank you again so much for coming on and talking about all this. I'd love to stay connected with you and just I'm sure there are plenty of other political topics you and I have a crossed interest in. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me on. And I was hoping I could do more research on land value taxes and really come up with a good answer, because I knew you were going to ask, well, how do you actually implement it in reality? And
mhm.
I still don't have an answer for myself, which bothers me because I'm a huge fan of the idea, and I feel like I need to crack this nut. And so I'm going to continue to be thinking about this quite a bit over the next given period of time. So I'd love to. I'll reach out to you again. Maybe we can do a follow up if I get more into the details of that.
Sure. And also, this is up on YouTube forever. It's free. You can use it, share it, whatever. You can make clips of it, whatever you want to do. But
Okay, cool.
you can also comment below it if there's stuff you decide you want to add or you go through and you're like, well, this no, maybe I'd make an adjustment or whatever. So,
Great.
and I'll pin your comment too, no problem. But yeah, so sweet.
Thanks.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And I'm gonna